So before we proceed, we ask that you keep in mind that the presentation is intended to provide general guidance. As product defect issues are complex, we recommend companies to consult with HSA should there be specific concerns or questions in scenarios that's not covered in this training workshop. As outlined previously, we'll just go through briefly. Okay, I'll be covering 1A to H. Okay, this is what we hope to see. Let you have a taste of what's overview of HSA past efforts to engage industry. In November 2016, the guidance on product defect reporting and recall of therapeutic product was first released. In 2018, we first engaged the industry on the format of reporting forms. In 2019, we rolled out the online form SG, and subsequently, we also conducted talks to the industry through platforms such as WHO, UMC, HSA, Inter-Regional PV Training Workshop, and Grad Cert Health Product Regulation by Duke Core NUS in 2018 and in 2019, respectively. And before the peak of COVID pandemic, we managed to have 2 sessions with industry, 1 feedback session in July 2019, and nitrosamine briefing in March 2020. We are thankful for the participation of the industry in this defect reporting effort. Let's go on. Now we'll dive into what is the product defect reporting that we hope to share. First, we'll cover about the legal requirements and responsibilities of company. By definition, a health product has a defect if it has or has possibly been adulterated or tampered with. It is or possibly a counterfeit or unwholesome health product. It's also of possibility of inadequate quality and unsafe or inefficacious for its intended purpose. Or it fails or could possibly fail to satisfy such other standards or requirements as per prescribed. So these are important legal requirements to be familiar with. They are the Health Product Act, Health Product Therapeutic Products Regulation, the Health Product CTGTP regulations. So who should report? I think it states here in section 42, the manufacturer, the importer, the supplier, or registrant of a health product. So by definition of supply in Health Product Act is in relation to anyone who sell the product, whether by retail, wholesale, or auction. So this actually prescribed at least one party is responsible for reporting the product defect to HSA. So in particular, section Regulation 34 specify the timeline of reporting. If a person is found guilty of an offense and shall be liable on conviction to a fine not exceeding 20,000 or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 12 months or to both. Besides the Act, the industry guidance outlines the legal requirements in simple layman terms. The guidance is applicable to product types, therapeutic products, unregistered products for patients' use in Singapore, the SIR, the registered products imported on consignment basis or via special consignment, cell tissue gene therapy products, products manufactured in Singapore for distribution outside of Singapore, and products used in clinical trials in Singapore. To sum up, company is responsible to ensure that the products meets the required standards of safety, efficacy, and quality for patient use. And they have to have adequate systems and appropriate procedures in place to investigate, review, report product defects, and if necessary, recall defective product from market. This is so to prevent further exposure of patients, of users to defective products. In addition to the Act and guidance, we would like to remind importer and wholesalers of therapeutic products that compliance to good distribution practice is mandatory. Hence, these are the points to take note of. In section 5.2, written procedures should be available for operations which may affect the quality of the products or of the distribution activities, such as for return products, complaints, recalls, investigations, and CAPA. We also like to highlight the section 6.2, 6.4, and 6.5. Product complaints, records should be retained and periodically reviewed to evaluate trends. Importers and wholesalers should consider if the defect will affect other batches. Now moving on to how do we receive product defect alerts? Sources of information. These are our sources. Environmental scanning of selected regulatory agency websites and company product defect reports, information shared by overseas drug regulators and international working group, media, and others. So we'd like to share in the next table the statistics. Yeah, the darker the color, the higher the number of defect alerts we receive. So over these 4 years, we are glad to note that company reporting has emerged as the leading source of defect alerts among the various channels for defect alerts. This demonstrates a proactive approach from company in monitoring the quality and safety of their products. This really reflects a strong commitment to quality control. So we want to thank you once again for the active reporting and encourage continual reporting to help safeguard public health. Let's move on. So we like to share about the defect issues that were picked up or reported by HSA. And we just select the top 5. Okay. Moving on. Because half of the survey respondents have experience with product defect reporting, we thought that we would like to briefly go through the online product defect form. The details found in the product defect form are important. They are product name, the manufacturer details, nature of the defect, when was the defect discovered, date that the local company becomes aware of the defect, investigation information, when available, proposed actions to be taken, and is the product on tender supply. For investigation details, we noted that it is optional. Please note that it's optional in the first report form. This can be subsequently emailed to us on an agreed timeline. As per Health Product Regulation Section 34, the timeline starts reporting when company is aware of the defect. So for critical defects that can pose serious threat to the intended users or public health, can lead to death or serious injury. So do consider that actually you need to report within 48 hours. For critical defects, patients who are on injectables, life-saving medicine, chronic medicine, and patients' vulnerable profile, such as children, elderly, or immunocompromised. So these are the factors to consider when reporting critical defect. And for non-critical defect that may cause illness or affect outcomes of a person's medical treatment or affect quality of a product, this is to be reported within 15 calendar days. We will now cover our considerations of what are reportable and non-reportable defect in the next few slides. And before we dive into our considerations, we want to reiterate the importance of defect reporting. Defect can affect the safety, quality, and efficacy of the product. Therefore, it's most important to report to HSA to ensure that appropriate actions are taken to mitigate risks to patients and consumers. And to bear in mind that all defects can potentially affect the safety and quality and efficacy of the product. Timely reporting actually fosters trust and engagement among all parties involved. Points to consider on defect reportable to HSA. These are our consideration. Defect likely to affect quality, safety, efficacy of the product, such as manufacturing deviations and non-compliance to GMP, the OOS issues, product mix-up, product contamination issues, packaging and labeling issues. For point 2, do consider reporting even when the above situations listed in point 1 are not affecting batches in Singapore. Because although batches have not been imported or supplied, the root cause can affect subsequent batches due to systemic manufacturing issue. Point 3, past case of similar nature, cluster of incidents. Because from trend analysis, the isolated incidents may no longer be an isolated case. So these need to be reported. Let's move on. This is now the examples of some critical defect. Manufacturing issue such as product formulation issue, where active ingredient may be missing, wrong active ingredient is used, product mix-up, where there's different strengths in the same container, and active or inactive pills incorrectly filled in contraceptive pill pack. I will briefly go through. The others are contamination such as glass, and contamination with body fluid, and contamination with bacteria, virus, fungi. Let's move on to the next table, which is the non-critical defects examples. These are OS of non-sterile products, manufacturing non-compliance, GMP, suspended GMP cert, primary packaging issue, secondary packaging, inner label and outer label. The next table is also some examples of non-critical defects, product deposit, product physical issue, and product adhesion issues. We hope to clarify that every defect should still be assessed individually to determine it is a critical or non-critical defect. Some issues can be critical or non-critical dependent on the consideration that we shared previously. Let's move on. So what is non-reportable defects? Here are the considerations as what is non-reportable. The left box, user-related issues. Defect arising from improper handling, storage, or administration rather than the product itself. Cosmetic issues that do not affect the intrinsic quality, efficacy, and safety of the medicine. Isolated incidents where single occurrence are no longer part of the recurring pattern. We want to note that affected batch is not distributed, but product is marketed locally. Last, non-supply, not yet marketed, where the product is not supplied and the defect is not due to systemic manufacturing issue. Hence, we want to highlight that company will need to do their preliminary investigation and assess if other or future batches will be affected. If yes, as the root cause is due to manufacturing deviation and or require variation to rectify defect, company to report to HSA. Point 3, for complaints, companies would still have to do their preliminary investigation if the complaint is a defect issue and if the complaint deviates from trend analysis or actual registered specification and suggests manufacturing systemic issue. In this case, they should report the defect. The last point, point 4, all investigation records of non-reportable defects should be made available upon HSA request. And if in doubt, please discuss with us. To better illustrate what the next few slides, we will have questions where these questions are actually mock-up questions that represent classical examples we have encountered. I will be sharing 7 questions. Let's go on to the first question. Do I need to report to HSA when the product is not yet on the market or imported? The scenario is the company manufactures a vaccine that has been distributed to several countries. And during routine market surveillance, it was discovered that several batches contain glass particles due to an issue in the manufacturing process. Mr. Reg was informed by his headquarters. The same vaccine and affected manufacturer are actually registered in Singapore, but the product has not yet been marketed or distributed to healthcare providers. yes, he needs to report to HSA. The rationale behind is glass particles, as what we shared on previous slide on critical defect, is a critical defect. Glass contamination can pose serious health risks. Although the batches may not be distributed locally, the issue is not isolated, and as manufacturing process is the root cause. Hence, to ensure proper investigation to be conducted, the manufacturing issue needs to be adequately addressed, such that future batches imported to Singapore will not be affected. The defect needs to be reported. Let's go on to question 2. Is lack of efficacy considered a product defect issue? Company manufactures a blood pressure medication that is widely used to manage hypertension. Several patients reported that their blood pressure remained uncontrolled despite taking the prescribed doses. Further investigation revealed that several batches of the product contains only 80% of the active ingredient, lower than the approved specification of 90 to 110%, due to manufacturing error. The batches were shipped to Singapore and have already been distributed to the pharmacies. So again, this needs to be reported. Lack of efficacy due to product quality issue is considered a product defect. Uncontrolled hypertension due to reduced potency can lead to adverse effects and causes severe complications. However, for situation when lack of efficacy is reported with no visual defect or no out of specs, it may be considered an adverse event report instead. Let's move on to question 3. Is missing QR code on product label reportable? A company manufactures prescription medication with a QR code printed on the packaging. The QR code contains information from the package insert and patient information leaflet. And during routine quality check, the company discovered that the batch of medication with missing QR code on the packaging has been shipped and distributed. The packs of the product do not contain the physical copy of the package insert or the patient information leaflet. Again, this needs to be reported because the QR code contains information that is able for patients and healthcare providers to access critical information. And this could impact the safe and effective use of the medicine, which potentially leads to medication error or delayed identification of safety concerns. Now we move on to question 4. Do I need to report out specification relating to tablet hardness and thickness? Manufacturer justified that the quality and efficacy of the tablets are not impacted. This needs to be reported because the OS, it's deviated from the registered specification, which has potential implication to the product stability, handling, or use by patients. Manufacturer may provide justification such as certificate of analysis for the specific local batch to justify that there's no issue with the local batch. However, reporting allows for further assessment to determine if additional actions are necessary. Moving on to question 5. Is isolated cases reportable? The scenario is the company manufactures epinephrine auto-injectors that is used to treat severe allergic reaction. A patient experienced the severe allergic reaction and attempts to use the pen. However, it failed to activate, and the medication was not delivered. The healthcare provider reported the malfunction to the company. Upon reviewing, the company concluded it is and probably an isolated incident due to improper handling or storage by the patient. As a result, the company did not report the defect to regulatory authorities. Subsequently, several similar reports of epinephrine pen failed to activate emerged from different users. At this point, the company realized that the problem was not isolated and was due to manufacturing defect in several batches of the pen. Hence, it was actually initially overlooked due to the assumption that it was a handling error. So the answer is isolated cases due to patient mishandling is non-reportable. However, isolated incident due to manufacturing defect is reportable. As part of the product quality review in PICS GMP requirements, company needs to review complaints to decide if they need to improve their product, even if it does not need to be reported as a product defect. Such case, they need to improve on the design of the pen to make it more user-friendly if the number of complaints due to improper handling by user is consistently high. This concept is applicable to faulty calibrated droppers or pump. It is important to emphasize again that if the report timeline from the first awareness by the company exceed, such as in this case, we can accept reasonable explanation, although we will expect timely reporting. Question 6. Do I need to report cracked valves due to transportation mishandling? The company manufactures an antibiotic injection used to treat bacterial infections, such as sepsis. This product is packaged in glass valves. Hospital reported cracked valves or leaks to the company, and initially it was concluded that this could be due to rough handling or improper packaging by the shipping company. Therefore, it was an isolated case, and company instructed the shipping provider to be careful with future deliveries. However, upon further investigation, it was discovered that the crack was due to the manufacturing issue, that during the sterilization process, the glass valves were exposed to excessive heat, making the glass more brittle and prone to cracking. Again, this is reportable as it is due to manufacturing issue. Cracked valves can pose serious health risks. Sterility of injection cannot be guaranteed, and contaminated valves can cause patients to develop severe infections. Leaking valves can result in dosing errors, and patients may not receive the full therapeutic dose of the antibiotic, which may lead to a worsening of their condition. Although transportation mishandling is non-reportable, we hope to emphasize that it is good to not assume that the problem is just related to transportation issues alone. Companies are to investigate thoroughly because delay can actually cause serious issues for the patients and put the patients at risk. Therefore, companies should monitor and trend the number of complaints. If it remains high, there is a need to improve the secondary packaging of the product, such as thicker shipper boxes, even if it's not a manufacturing issue. So similarly for this case, question 6, the case is delayed when the first company becomes aware of the issue. But again, we need to highlight that as long as you provide explanation for the delay, we are able to accept the report. Moving on to question 7, do I need to report chipped tablets? Company received reports of chipped tablets from hospital. The tablet is used to prevent blood clots in patients at high risk of stroke. Company advised pharmacy to inspect the tablet for chips and report any issues, but no immediate recall was issued. Upon further investigation, it was found that the issue was due to manufacturing defect affecting the tablet coat and compression process, causing the tablet to be more fragile and prone to chipping. This is again a reportable defect as it is due to manufacturing defect issue. Chip tablets made it difficult to ensure consistent dosing, and in this case, immediate release tablets, the disintegration performance has a direct impact on the therapeutic effect of the medication. So companies to review all complaints and continued monitoring of similar defect for distributed batches that were manufactured during the period of manufacturing defect. However, we like to highlight that if the chip tablet is within the acceptable quality limit that was discovered before release into the market, there is no need to report as defect. I'm We have now come to the end of my first part of presentation. We will take a 5-10 minutes break, and my colleague will take you through the next section on investigation and recall.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming back. My name is Chiza. I'm a colleague of Michelle, and I'll be taking you through to the next section, which is on investigation report, health hazard assessment, and corrective and preventive actions. So essentially, the next part is it's about the reason why we ask you for a wealth of information when you submit a product defect report. So for a good investigation report, consists of 5 elements. The intention of asking it is to ascertain what is the issue, how widespread is the issue, was there past occurrences of the issue, what is the root cause, and what is the risk posed by the issue, and finally, what is the company intending to do about the issue. So for the first part, details and initial evaluation. So we need to find out what exactly is the issue. So for this, you need to provide us with a detailed description of the defect, including the size, composition, and test reports, a sample evaluation to review the defective product. If you have photos, it would be great because photos tell a clearer picture than words at times. And of course, the cause and timing. How did you discover it? When did it occur, and when was it discovered? The second part of the report involves distribution. This provides us with an estimation how widespread is the issue. So for this, we need a distribution record. Who was the product sold to? Please indicate if it's an ALP standard product. With ALP standard product, our concern is the large quantities involved, hence the exposure is very great. Also need a batch review to see if any other batches were affected, and if possible, other products, perhaps using the same manufacturing line, whether there are other products involved as well. We need to test retention samples if necessary. The third part of the investigation report is regarding the history of the defect. There are prior complaints about the issue before you picked it up this time and reported to HSA. Were there previous complaints about it overseas? Were there regulatory actions taken by other regulators regarding the same issue? Fourth part involves root analysis and risk analysis. This quantifies exactly what is the cause of the defect and what is the risk posed by the defect. So we would like to see how was the root cause identified, and how did you evaluate how this defect will pose on the patient's current treatment and health, especially if it involves vulnerable groups such as children, elderly, or immunocompromised individuals. For this, we will talk later on the health hazard assessment. And finally, what is your company's intention? Short term, to deal with the product if it is on the market, and long term, in terms of corrective actions to prevent the issue from reoccurring again. This is just an example of what is a possible tool you can use for investigation, which a lot of companies tend to use, the fishbone Ishikawa diagram. The investigation is broken down into 5 parts. So you investigate it through whether it's a manpower issue, whether it's machine related, whether problem comes from your raw materials, whether it's process related, or finally, whether it's due to the environment. Just now I mentioned about the quantifying of the risk of the defect and what is the risk posed by the defect. So for this, we need a health hazard assessment. For the health hazard assessment, there are 4 components ideally. First, you identify what is the hazard. You determine what is the defect and what is this defect going to do to harm the patient using the product. Second, you need to analyze the risk. You have to provide an assessment of what's the likelihood of this occurring and evaluate both the short and long-term effects of the risk patient were to use the product. Then you need to analyze what is the impact of the issue towards the patient. So you need to see how it affects the patient's current treatment and overall health outcomes. Again, you need to consider how this defect will affect the vulnerable population, such as kids, elderly patients, pregnant women, or immunocompromised individual. Finally, it's about evidence. So you need to provide us with an assessment of all the scientific and technical evidence to support your prior 3 parts, to prove and illustrate the risk is what it is, and it is based on scientific evidence. This is just an overview about all the information we ask for, why we ask for it. Sometimes it may not be clear, but essentially the reason why we ask for an investigation report, the batch distribution data, the health hazard assessment, what overseas regulators are doing is essentially to do 2 things. We need to know what is the risk involved. We need to frame the risk. What is the exposure to our local population? Second consideration is about supply. If the risk is too great, if the product needs to be recalled, we need to prepare for the potential risk of supply disruption. So hence, we need to see how widespread is the issue and what are the measures we can take to prevent the supply disruption. We understand at the time of reporting of a product defect, you will not have all the information available. That is understandable. So as such, it is highly advisable that you first make the report to us with whatever information you have so that you meet the timelines for product defect reporting. You can follow this up with the supplementary information further down the road. So your preliminary investigation and assessment, you can submit it within 5 working days from your initial awareness of the defect or your initial report as well. If it is a critical defect, if it is a non-critical defect, you can do so within 15 calendar days. The health hazard assessment can be submitted to up to within 15 calendar days to report to HSA. Of course, finally, your investigation report, including your CAPA, should be submitted within 30 days. However, if the investigation is long drawn, you may provide us with an interim report at the 30-day time point and update us what exactly is happening. In addition to the documents I mentioned earlier, we may ask for additional supportive information to provide a better, clearer picture. This may include certificate of analysis, stability studies. It may involve providing us with GMP certificates, re-inspection reports if it involves site issues, and if a product is not marketed in Singapore, we may require a letter of undertaking. So we've talked about risks, so the next part is about risks. What exactly do you do with it now that you know what is the risk involved? So you only have 2 options. For the immediate, you need to reduce or remove the risk. And for the long term, you need to identify measures to be implemented to prevent the recurrence of the risks. So for the short term or the immediate, simple steps such as quarantining the affected batches or the affected product. You may suspend the sales or supply of the product. If it is very bad, you may need to recall the product. In some cases, you may even need to cease importation. Of course, the worst case scenario is you suspend the product registration. For the long term, the aim is to prevent recurrence. So this will always involve a reviewing of your manufacturing processes. So you will need to see what needs to be changed in your manufacturing process. Whether it's a formulation issue, if so, you need to review your formulation. The third is any of your in-process controls. Do any of those needs changing as well? At this point, I will bring up a question we've been asked for. Throughout my presentation, it may have intermittent disruptions with questions to clarify certain questions we've been asked for by the industry. It comes up when it's related to the topic. So in this case, we've received a question regarding revising product specifications for stability-related impurities. So say you have a pharmaceutical company that has reported an impurity at a 36-month during a 36-month stability study. The normal specification states the limit to be 1%, but the company found out that it's now 1.1%. This degradant impurity is low in acute toxicity. It does not have any mutagenic potential, so it does not appear to be a dangerous impurity. And there is a request to reduce the shelf life from 36 to 24 months, and instead of reducing the shelf life from 36 to 24 months, the company is proposing to increase the specifications of the impurity so that the total impurities at the point of release is changed. So is this an acceptable approach of widening the specifications but not reducing the shelf life? First, the product defect must be reported. Second, the widening of impurities should not be the first approach, because there's concerns whether your company is understanding why is the impurity levels going up. So the company is advised to perform and investigate to determine the root cause of why this out of specification is occurring, especially if an impurity has been stable since the point of registration. So a company is usually advised to perform a trending of its historical stability data to identify where is the shift in the trends. Only upon this, you should discuss your findings with HSA before deciding to just widen the specs. Furthermore, any changes your company proposes must be approved through an MIV before your changes can be implemented. We've also received another question regarding CAPA effectiveness report. Do companies need to submit such an effectiveness report? The short answer is no. HSA does not require a CAPA effectiveness report, because such a report is used to demonstrate the actions taken. It's been successful to prevent the recurrence of the issue. However, we may request for it if the CAPA has not been finalized or is disputable. Another question we frequently get is, can a company bring in unaffected batches meant for another country via the special consignment route as part of a corrective action? The special consignment can be considered if it is a situation where there is a serious out-of-stock situation. It should not be the first choice. However, please bear in mind that apart from the artwork, the product should be coming from an unaffected source, and the specifications from this source should be the same as the one in Singapore. You may find out more at our HSA website regarding what is the requirements for special consignment. So if your company needs to bring in a batch that's very affected by the defect, please do not submit a special consignment for approval to bring in such a batch. This should be done as part of your product defect reporting. You may submit the product defect report indicating you wish to bring in a batch, and whether you're allowed to bring it in will be reviewed as a whole. The next question involves temperature excursion. So we have a company here that manufactures and handles insulin, and insulin has to be stored between 2 to 8 degrees to maintain its efficacy. However, during a distribution, it was discovered that several shipments were exposed to a temperature excursion of 10 degrees for a day due to a failure in the transport refrigeration system. For this, there are 3 scenarios. The first is your company should have an SOP determining what an excursion should be, what is the maximum temperature. If this falls outside the allowable excursion limit per your SOP, the batch should have been rejected and should not be released. If so, because the batch was not released, you don't need to report this to HSA. However, in the second scenario, if the batch was released, then a recall has to be considered, and of course, you have to then report this to HSA. In the third scenario, if it was marginally outside an excursion limit and the batch was not released, but in this situation there was a shortage of supply of insulin on the market, please discuss with HSA what you should do with the affected batch. Regardless of which of these three scenarios, your company will still need to perform an investigation on why this temperature excursion occurred and to take measures to prevent this issue from further recurring. The next question is about radiopharmaceuticals. Here we have a company that handles radiopharmaceuticals and our specification and wish to be recalled. The product was currently kept at the healthcare institution's waste decay room. So how should the recall of this product be handled? It will be handled as with all therapeutic products. It must be retrieved from the healthcare institution and disposed of within 3 months. And this disposal should be supported by a certificate of destruction, or if it was shipped back to the manufacturer, you can provide us with the airway bill number. Or in the meantime, between the time of its retrieval and disposal, if you wish to allow it to be remaining, wish to allow it to remain within the healthcare institution's premises, you may need to discuss the issue with the institution and provide us with an update as to how long it will be there and when will it be retrieved. The next is about several misconceptions regarding recalls and product defects. The first is a very common misconception. Product defect reporting is only required if the affected batch is supplied in Singapore. That is not true. You have to product defect reporting depends on the systemic issue. Depends on the issue at hand. If it is a systemic issue, it will indicate there's a wider problem at hand. That means future batches that will be supplied to Singapore could eventually have the similar product defect that's reported overseas. As such, even though the initial batches affected were not in Singapore, you should still report this to HSA. So reporting to HSA ensures all potential risks and appropriate actions are taken. And this is a proactive approach to public health and safeguarding against future risks of preventing these defective batches with similar issues from reaching our local market. Another common misconception is a position of a distributor. I'm a distributor, hence I do not need to report product defects. Again, that is not true. Distributors are also legally obligated to report product defects. However, you may not need to wish to report to HSA, as you may do so to the product registrant, who will then follow up with HSA with the full product defect report. Another common misconception is I can submit a post-approval variation application instead of a product defect report. Again, no. Deviations from specifications are deemed product defects. So regulations mandate that any product defect that may impact safety, quality, and efficacy must be reported to HSA when it is identified. So a variation application alone does not fulfill this obligation. Variation applications meant for prospective changes for future batches yet to be imported in Singapore. Another question we often get is, I do not need to submit an investigation report if the product in question has been imported via the special access route. Again, this is not true. Even though it is a product that has been imported through the SAR, it is still possible and necessary to obtain such an investigation report. Because if you do not obtain the report, we will require it to confirm the issue at hand has been resolved. Because if not, your next SAR application, you will be asked to provide evidence to determine if the issue has been addressed. The next section we'll be talking about is regarding product recalls. This is just a snapshot or some news regarding recalls that have occurred in the past. Just to illustrate why it is important to perform recalls, essentially is to remove harmful products from the market so they do not pose risks to the patients. So a recall, as I said, is essentially the process of removing a product that has been deemed unsafe or defective. It's the intention to do so to protect consumers from further harm. So companies may need to consider and initiate a recall if and when necessary, depending on the issue at hand. In the Health Products Act, in Section 42, HSA has been empowered to request for companies to conduct a recall if necessary, and an official letter from HSA will be issued by HSA. An official letter from HSA will be sent to the company to direct them to perform a recall if necessary. In the therapeutic products regulation, on top of the earlier powers, it's also mentioned that every manufacturer, importer, supplier, or registrar of a therapeutic product who intends to perform a recall must, no later than 24 hours, inform HSA of the recall before performing it. This is a legal requirement. That means you cannot perform a recall before informing HSA 24 hours before your intent of conducting one. If you want more information, you may refer to our guidance for the industry on product defects and product recall procedures. We've summarized some of the points from our guidance here. So product recalls may be initiated by the company, as you are well aware. A company does not need to seek HSA's approval for initiating a recall, but you must notify HSA no later than 24 hours before starting a recall. This will provide HSA time to review the information surrounding the recall and determine if your company's proposal for the recall is sufficient, because if not, HSA may escalate the class or the level of the product recall. We will talk more about class and product level in the next few slides. Companies are advised to ensure your product recall procedures are effective. You should maintain an accurate list of all the customers you've supplied the product to, so that when you do need to perform a recall, they can be notified quickly. A written communication is always recommended. Companies are also advised to maintain a log or maintain evidence of receipt and acknowledgement by your customers. And finally, do please keep HSA informed, updated on the progress of your recall campaign. So just now I was talking about class and level. So essentially, to keep it simple, a recall has two dimensions. The class of the recall denotes how fast you're supposed to conduct the recall. The level of the recall determines how far down your supply chain you're going to recall the product from. So the class of the recall, there's either class 1 or class 2. Class 1 is the fastest, obviously, and it is definitely required for defects which may cause death or severe health consequences. Most cases, class 2 will be sufficient. This is a pictorial comparison on the difference between a class 1 recall and a class 2 recall. So for both recalls, again, please notify HSA 24 hours before your intention to do it. Then on the day of the recall, on the day of your on the day you've decided to recall, you have to issue a dear purchaser letter to inform your purchasers you're going to do a recall. For class 1, this dear purchaser letter must be issued within 1 day, informing HSA you're going to do the recall. For class 2, you must issue the dear purchaser letter within 3 days after you've informed HSA. For Class 1 recall, the recall must be completed and you will need to recall all your affected stocks within 1 week. For Class 2 recall, all this must be performed within 3 weeks. For both recalls, after you've completed it, you need to dispose, destroy, or send the product back to your manufacturer if you so wish, and provide us with evidence of the disposal of the stocks within 90 days. So just now we talked about timelines, which is the class. Now we talk about the level of the recall. So there are 3 levels. You can do a wholesaler level, a retailer level, or consumer level. It depends how far down the supply chain you wish to perform it on. But this is determined by the issue of the hazard at hand and how far it's been distributed. So if the product has not been distributed too far down the supply chain and still in your warehouse, you may perform a wholesaler level recall. However, if it has been distributed and it is with the consumers or the healthcare professionals or at institutions and clinics, you will need to see how far you want to retrieve the product. If the product is, say, an injectable only administered at clinic or hospitals, retail level is sufficient because it's unlikely the patient will take the product home. And recalling it at the retail level, you can get it all back from the clinics and the hospitals. However, if it's a simple tablet for blood pressure or pain, and the patient has taken it home, and the hazard is very great, you will need to recall it all the way down to the patient level. So you perform your recall, you collected everything back. You will next need to perform what we call a product recall completion. The next step will be the product recall completion, whereby you need to go to the HSA website and you will need to fill out the form, which reconciles everything you have performed relating to the recall. Form this after the recall is done, depending on whether it's a Class 1 or Class 2, and then followed by a submission of certificate of destruction in 3 months. Recall reconciliation is very important because it helps us check everything has been taken back. So for this, there are 5 things you need to check. You need to check how much was distributed to each customer. You need to see what was returned from each customer. Then you need to determine what was not recovered and why. Then you need to see what's left in your inventory. Then you need to total it all up. So then your quantity destroyed needs to match everything you have recovered. This information will be requested for in your recall reconciliation report, which you will submit to HSA, as I mentioned earlier. The second thing is about the effectiveness check of the recall. Your company may wish to perform an effectiveness check so that further down, if you undergo another recall campaign again, you'll be well prepared. For this, there are 6 steps you may wish to check for. First is you need to verify you need to verify the notification to confirm that all the parties were notified of your recall. You need to maintain an evidence of receipt of the recall notice received and sent by recipients. So this is a form of acknowledgement that they have received your communication. Then you need to measure the response rate, how fast it was sent out, and how fast did they respond. Then you need to track and document the amount of product returned, recovered, and then, of course, finally destroyed. You may wish to consider conducting an on-site checks, where be it the warehouse or retailers to confirm that there are no products left over so that they may accidentally go back into the supply chain and be sold. Of course, finally, you may need to consider all the corrective actions your company may need to implement, including product disposal or refunds to your purchasers if necessary. So the next few slides will be on questions relating to recalls. So one common one we've received is relating to pack sizes. So some companies do supply their products in large quantities, bottles of 500, could be 10 by 10 strips or liters of solutions. In the event of recall, if these products were broken down to smaller pack sizes, can they not take back the loose tablets or smaller pack syrups? The answer is no. When you perform a recall, you should take it all back regardless what is the current repack size it is. This is to ensure that all the defective product is removed from the market and ensures patient safety and prevents the use of potentially defective medicines. Because if it's not disposed of properly, they might end up in the supply chain again. Another question we've received before regarding vending machines. Who is responsible for recalling the products if they are made available in vending machines? So we treat vending machines as just another form, as another channel of supply. So in this case, the company will need to work with the suppliers and the people who run the vending machines to retrieve the defective product in a timely manner, as stipulated by the recall timelines. Another question we've received involves recall simulations. Is there a requirement to perform a recall simulation if an actual recall does not happen within 12 months? So as a licensed importer or wholesaler that is expected to maintain a GDP-compliant quality system, you must need to ensure that you have the arrangements in place that will be able to perform a recall effectively. So to do so, you need to evaluate your product recall processes. So typically within a year, you should perform some degree of assessment to performance of a recall simulation to see if you're ready for a recall. Although we do not prescribe frequency of such an exercise, you should use a risk-based approach to determine how frequent such exercises should be carried out. Sort of like a fire drill. Another question is, if we had a near-miss incident this year and the traceability was completed, stocks were quarantined in the warehouse waiting for product incident review meeting, can we consider this to be a recall simulation? The answer is yes, you can consider such an incident to be a recall simulation. Some common misconceptions regarding recalls. One-for-one exchanges. We understand that some companies would like to appease the customers and perform a quick one-to-one exchange. It is however, such exchanges are deemed to be a recall, and you can't call it a one-for-one exchange. So if you do discover a defective product and you need to take the product back from the customer, it's better to instruct them to quarantine the product and inform HSA of the issue, then perform it as a recall. My recall is expected to exceed the stipulated timelines, be it Class 1 or Class 2. But I don't think I need to send a request to HSA to ask for an extension. The answer is no. You should notify us promptly because we are monitoring your recalls and we would expect a recall reconciliation to be submitted to us by the end of the duration. If it was a Class 1, we would expect it slightly after a week. If it's a Class 2, we would expect the report just after 3 weeks. So if we don't receive the report, we would be aware that your recall has exceeded the timeline and we will not know why. So please let us know in advance if you do need additional time. Companies can wait to destroy their products. No, you should provide us with a certificate of destruction within 3 months from your recall completion date. But we do understand that some companies do need to collate products to destroy, because probably destroying 1 or 2 tablets may not be cost effective. For such instances, you should approach HSA to discuss with us for some, perhaps an extension of your timeline to destroy your products. Now we'll go through a few short case studies to highlight the process of product defect reporting and recall. So this is the first one, a company called Pharmasync Private Limited. They are the product registrant for a injection ABC 5%. Pharma Global is their global counterpart. And this is used in children, adults, and elderly for treatment of disease X. The shelf life is 36 months. So in May 2024, HSA discovered that one batch of ABC injections were recalled overseas in country A. This is due to microbial contamination. So HSA promptly contacted Pharmasync on 28th of May. The company informed HSA they were not aware of the issue. And they did a quick check and came back to tell us that proposing not to submit product defect report because the recall batch overseas is not the ones was not imported into Singapore. Later, they followed up with another investigation with their global office, and the out of specification was confirmed, and the global office was aware of it on the 28th of February, but the local branch was not informed at the point in time. Additionally, they found out that this issue was caused by lapses in aseptic manufacturing processes, and our local batches are from the same site as the recall batch. So based on the investigation, Pharmasync then submitted a product defect report on the 10th of June, roughly about 13 days later. Based on their investigation report, they suspect 5 batches locally could be implicated, and their medical risk assessment reported that this may lead to a critical life-threatening infections and even death. So the company proposed a Class 2 wholesaler level recall, and they will issue a dear purchaser letter. As I mentioned earlier, for serious critical issues, minimum requirement will be a Class 1 because you need to remove the product as soon as possible. So because it is a contaminated product, you should remove it within 1 week. So in this case, HSA raised the level of recall to a Class 1. And you can't do it at a wholesaler level because you have products out there. So because it's an injection and unlikely to be used by patients on their own, it was raised to a Class 1 retail level to be removed from clinics and hospitals. So the problem here is the critical defect, which is a defect that can cause death, was not reported within 48 hours, but within 13 days. That was the first problem. The second is the insufficient urgency in the recall. So the recall was initiated on the 11th of June. On June the 18th, the recall completion form was then not submitted to HSA. HSA contacted them regarding the issue, and they informed us that there was an inability to complete it within 1 week due to logistical constraints. But this is only after we kept chasing for it. Then, after the collection, Pharmasync engaged for the waste private limited to destroy the product, and it was then certificate of destruction was then provided to HSA. So the learning point for this was the report of product defects should be done even though the affected batches were not in Singapore, because the issue is systemic. Should be done within timelines based on the critical nature of the defect, and not within. That's the second. The third is the recall should be completed within timelines. The fourth was the recall should the level and class of the recall, class and level of the recall should commensurate the risk involved. The second case involves a company's request to widen the specification for an assay value due to an OOS detected in a stability study. So we have a Pharmaceutical Private Limited product registrant for a 5 milligram tablet, ABC. The company submitted an MIV1 to widen the specs for the assay value from 95 to 105 to be widened to 90 to 110. which is quite a significant increase. So in the MIV application, it was noted that the reason was because the company detected an out-of-specification result on 18 months. So on the 18 month of the product's 36-month shelf life, midway, it was found to be 93.9 to 94.5. This is a reportable defect. So this should be reported to HSA as a product defect reporting and not go through a submission of MIV to widen the specs instead. So based on Cuticle's medical risk assessment, they found that the assay value, even though it was lower than the registered specifications, does not pose a risk to the patients, and it does not impact the safety and efficacy of the product. Hence, that was the company's approach to not submitting product defect. Not true. Any other specifications from the registered specifications are deemed defects and must be reported to HSA as a product defect. Then they shared that additionally, this widening of specs been approved in 2 countries overseas. Regardless if it was approved overseas, HSA will still need to review the merit of the widening of the specifications, and it should be done through the product defect reporting process and not through an MIV. So the company should have performed its investigation root cause, determine the root cause of why there was a widening. Of course, this should have been done so after they've submitted a product defect report. Finally, after they have reviewed everything with HSA, then only then should Cuticle's MIV for the widening of the specifications be submitted. Okay, we're nearly at the end. The next section is on communication strategies. It's a very a quick overview on 2 channels of communications companies frequently use to reach out to their stakeholders. So essentially, there are only 2 channels. You have your Dear Purchaser letter, which is the likely more frequently used involving administrative matters. And of course, the other channel is the Dear Healthcare Professional letter. So the difference is quite clear. Your DPL is essentially to provide logistics instructions. So you send it out if there is if you want to quarantine something, you're going to tell your purchasers you want to recall something, or if there's going to be a supply shortage. So this usually involves very administrative matters. Such letters usually are not vetted by HSA, but we do request for a quick view of it and for a copy for documentation purpose. We do not publish these letters on the HSA website. For Dear Healthcare Professional letter, which has wider implications because they advise clinicians what to do. These ones are slightly more critical. Target audience are healthcare professionals. They're essentially issued whenever there are changes to labeling. You want to update on any new safety information. You want to prepare the healthcare professional that there's a possible recall or withdrawal, and then subsequently they may need to perform some form of clinical intervention, be it a monitoring of the patient or perhaps altering the patient's treatment. So these letters are more critical, and we do vet them, and a copy of it or an abstract will be placed on HSA's website. I won't show you a copy of the DHCPL, but for the purpose of this webinar, we will talk more of the Dear Purchaser letter because it involves a recall. This is a sample of a Dear Purchaser letter involving a recall. It's very simple. Essentially, you just need to date it to your target audience. Your subject should be the title of why you're writing to them, be it a recall, suspending, quarantine, followed by a paragraph on a short background of what is going on. Tell them what is the defect involved, what are the potential risks, what they need to do. Then you provide them with details of what are the affected batches. Then you follow up with instructions on what you want them to do. Quarantine, is a recall, or is a refund. Finally, you need to provide them with contact details should they have further queries regarding what they need to do. Some of the efficiencies in the communication letters we've seen, I will highlight here. We may not go through all of them. So for the letters involving the dear purchaser letters, we've seen on several occasions the title of the letter is unclear. The title of the company would just put the name of the product, but you do not put why. What is the title? Should be instead recall of tablet ABC. Instead, they just put ABC, which adds confusion. Then they do not explain what is the issue or the intent of the communication. If they say it's a recall, they do not explain why there's a recall, how widespread is the recall. No mention of how the defect was discovered, mention of what is the potential risk. The instructions are not clear. They do not provide deadlines. They do not indicate what needs to be recalled. So we're talking about open packs and unopened packs. Everything should have been recalled. They do not state when. They do not provide contact details for further clarification, and some companies do not provide an acknowledgement. It could be very critical for your assessment of your recall effectiveness. Finally, this is just an introduction to some of the tools we have on the HSA website. We have a product defect classification tool, so you can use this to classify and see what is your defects classification. This tool is available on the HSA website. You can have a try after the webinar. We also have an e-video which provides you with explanation and also educates on what companies need to do for product defect reporting and how you should perform a product recall.
So by now, I hope it's clear that addressing the product defects and recall procedure requires a collective efforts, and the presentation and the discussion today will reinforce the shared commitments to product safety and compliance. We'll be sharing the slides to all participants after the sessions for your future reference. And once again, thank you for your participation, and we will look forward to continuing our partnership between the industry and the drug regulators. Thank you so much, everyone. Don't forget, tomorrow we have the second workshop on the nitrosamine, same time, 2 p.m. tomorrow. See you.